Every era of economic growth has its transformative infrastructure, railroads, highways, broadband. How about data centers? We'll talk about that today on Builders Live. Hey, I'm Chris Wink. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Technically, the news organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs. Practically every U.S. state has some version of an active data center project right now. These are transformative economic development projects that are either boons to particularly rural or underdeveloped areas that need them, or they're an economic boondoggle that is over-financing a strategy that is bound to go bust. We're going to talk about how place-based economic developers, ecosystem builders, and the like should look at data centers as part of their state's economic development strategy. And to do that, I'm joined by Brackeen of Lightship Capital, Victor Hwang of Right to Start, and Rae'Mah Henderson of Techstars. Thanks for being here, friends.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us. Always a blast.
Always a blast. Okay. This month's Builders Live, we're going to talk about data centers, which sounds boring, but we're going to make it interesting. Before we do that, we always like to start off Builders Live with something that is looking optimistic. Can you guys throw at me a bright light in ecosystem building you see around the country right now? And Victor, maybe because you have the American flag flowing behind you, I'm going to throw to you first and go from there.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies. I am in Northwest Arkansas right now. I'm actually in Fayetteville, and you can see so one of the two flags here, the non-U.S. flag, is the Arkansas flag, and the bright light here is what we're seeing here in Arkansas. We're actually hosting it for Right to Start, a celebration of entrepreneurship, which is like a summit of entrepreneurs and public leaders here. And we've got a bunch of entrepreneurs sharing their stories. We've got city council people, we have state representatives, and other leaders. We got the top official in entrepreneurship in the state of Arkansas here. And I just left the conference to come up here, and we have there's a panel of entrepreneurs, and there were 4 of them, and they came from all different walks of life, building businesses. One was doing a climbing gym, one was doing a health and wellness business, one was doing a barbecue business, one was a rural farmer. And it was so interesting. Their stories were so compelling. And what became clear to me, and I know this, but hearing it every time, it's like fresh, which is that entrepreneurs like that never get a chance to tell their story. And one of them was saying, it's just great to have, we just appreciate this platform to speak our truth, because they never get to talk about the issues they're dealing with and how hard it is. And because, why would they, right? Who would actually put the people that found these businesses on a panel to speak in front of an audience like that? And to hear their stories is always so compelling and moving. And I just thought it was just great. And I think, despite whatever you read in the news and all the issues you hear in America, the entrepreneurial spirit it's alive and kicking. You just got to speak to the entrepreneurs and get out of your, social media bubble and hear what's really going on out there. It's always inspiring to hear from entrepreneurs that are building stuff.
Shout out to Northwest Arkansas. Rae'Mah, Brian?
Can I go next? Because I've got an Arkansas one. Interestingly.
All right. All right, Arkansas, we're shouting out for you.
This is an example of an ecosystem might be working, right? When you have multiple people, have multiple things, unrelated. A little further south in Little Rock, where we got a conference coming up called Onward. It's historically, if you guys know Arkansas a little bit, there's a lot of energy around Bentonville. The Waldens do a lot of great work and sponsor a lot of good things, right? So you've got a lot of conferences and things that are that part of the state. Though it's larger city, right? Little Rock sometimes lags behind in some of these events, even though it's a great town, great city, presidential library, the whole 9. So we're going to spend some time there, meeting funders and founders and ecosystem building, and hopefully some checks get written.
I failed to pull this up, Brian, but yeah, you is this the
Onward? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay. All right, love to hear this, Brian. Thanks. Rae'Mah, what you got?
Oh my gosh, so I actually dropped in a Technically article. I want to shout out my bright light on Baltimore. Oh my gosh. So Love Baltimore. I've actually had never been, and my mom was so scared. She's like, "Oh, Baltimore is dangerous. Don't go." Don't go. I got to go and visit the AI healthcare startups there and actually support their demo day. Phenomenal team. I want to shout out like Nick Culbertson, Emily McClanahan, and Ashley Kovacs. Those balloons you see in the background, I blew those up. Can you believe it? So I want to shout them out today. Much love to that community.
I love that. All right, so then I'll throw one that actually ties us together. I watch with great interest the still credible Census Bureau monthly data on business starts. We just got August. There's always a month lag, and as you can see here, August number of high propensity business starts, which is a Census Bureau wonky term that basically is a class of businesses that are most likely to employ people. We just had what is the second highest number on record. So those of you following along will know we had a big giant jump in business starts in the pandemic era. July 2020 is the most high propensity businesses that have started in the last 40 years since we started this metric. And we just had the second highest. It's been an elevated status ever since, but we just did a piece on this, watching the word entrepreneur outgrow the word of small business owner and operator in the literature, but it is still booming. And to be clear, some of the root causes are bad and problematic, which we report on a bunch of technically and are interesting and we talk about here, but some of them are absolutely 100% good. And some of the business starts are still at a disproportionately high rate. This is so different than it was in the 2010s. And if your strategy is not different, you're not paying attention, because it is different than it was in 2019. So that's my bright light. Let's talk about different kind of business starts.
That's really cool, though. By the way, the word entrepreneur has outpaced the phrase small business, which I did not even know that, and I should know that. So thank you. That's really interesting.
This is why we like journalism, Victor. So this is pulled from Google Ngram as the data source, but this was a crucial moment in 2010 when how these terms are being used and shifted, and we've gone all entrepreneur. Just check out the news. Check out last week's Builders newsletter in my story, because it is Victor. It came out of a piece talking about how the word entrepreneur came in the industrial age, late 19th century, but really picks up steam in the 90s in American usage. You can chart the pop in the use of the term entrepreneur, and it's kind of had another big pop post Great Recession. And I talked to an economist that attributed it to this changing relationship to entrepreneurship, in that entrepreneur has that coded connotation of agency, of doing, where owner has a kind of more complacent connotation to it. Oh, I own a thing, it just sits there, which might not be fair, but that's just the connotation in the terminology, that entrepreneur has kind of an action to it. And we've moved toward that more action feel of the word.
So cool. Very interesting.
Yeah. Agreed. Let's talk about something that is maybe viewed as very supportive of entrepreneurship or very anti-entrepreneurial. I think how you view data centers actually says a lot about what you think economic development looks like. So data centers are big. If you live in a state that has had in the last year a controversial data center and you're like, it's only happening to me. Nope. This has been a big conversation. Let me throw a couple charts at you guys, Victor, Brian, and Rae'Mah, and then get some reaction from you. So two things that will set up. One, a few trade groups have been tracking the rollout of how data centers have grown basically pre-pandemic. This was building pre-pandemic. It's a ChatGPT moment, but it's true that the explosion of the mega scale or hyperscalers, as it were, has grown it. But we've seen in the last 5 years, data centers sprawl out across the country. And one of the reasons that shows up is just the demand. This is the gas station metaphor that we technically use a bunch. If you're going to have cars be deployed in more places around a country, you're eventually going to need more gas stations, and data centers are a kind of thing like that for higher use of data. So the question is not whether there will be data centers. The question is how many and how will they priced out, and will we have stranded assets? And so I thought this was interesting that last week Apollo had a working paper that has been handed around in some economic development circles that probably we've already seen the slowdown in data center construction. So the moment all the national media start covering something, the moment is probably already passed. That's a good rule of thumb, and that is probably true. And we've already had a little bit of the slowdown. But there are lots of shovels in the ground right now. There's lots of environmental debates. There's lots of stranded asset debates. So that's the situation as it sits right now. Brian, Victor, Rae'Mah, maybe Brian, I'm going to throw it to you first as kind of like the investor of the group. But talk to me about when you hear term data center, where are you in the spectrum between nightmare versus economic boon? Where are you in that spectrum?
Well, I have so many comments, even for the lead up.
I love it. Good.
Number one, there's only too many gas stations unless you run out of gas. And then you're thinking, why is there no gas station here? Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. That's a possibility. Like you can literally run out of compute. And we saw that.
And this is the Altman line. Altman's line is you would rather have too many than too little. That's all Altman's defense right now.
It's 100% true. And we see that in real terms this week when we had the issue with Amazon, where essentially data from databases couldn't get to websites. It's similar to taking a third of the servers offline, essentially, right? And so all that pain that we felt as an economy, and people felt even just having fun on their own devices, that is what not enough data in data centers looks like in the real world. That's like my first point. Second point in the lead up, if you go back to your chart about kind of the waning building of data centers.
Yeah.
What us investors and techies will tell you is that's not a downward trend. That's a cyclical trend. You see, there's a wave and a low and a wave and a low. The next wave is absolutely coming.
Interesting.
Absolutely, right?
That's interesting.
And so we shouldn't make policy based on the downward side of the end of one cycle, because the next cycle is absolutely on the way. And we know that because that's where we're investing, right? We're investing in the next cycle. So we know that that's coming. And then on the question, go ahead.
No, sorry. I'm just commenting. I'm complimenting you.
I love it. All day. And on the actual direct question of like how we feel in Ohio, and I think we're all gonna have different feelings and voices on this topic. We love data centers. We're big fans, but we're definitely eyes wide open about how to build them, where to build them, and we have some actual natural benefits that other states don't have. For instance, we're on the Great Lakes. So we have this infinite fresh water source, right? That is trillions and trillions and trillions of gallons that we can use to power these data centers. When you put a data center in a community that has a single water source, it might be a lake, right? And we're all sharing and drawing from the same, water site. It's a completely different scenario. And so Ohio is uniquely situated to have data centers. And so we're building around that unique talent.
I'm pulling up here. You pointed out Jobs Ohio, the state's well-known economic development organization having a data center tax exemption. I also just shout out earlier that even before this most recent cycle, the existing FDI data showed that Ohio has been a top 5 state for the development of data centers. So noting on those two parts. Let's loop back to you in a second, Brian, but let me go round the horn to others here. Rae'Mah, I saw Birmingham is on the long list of regions right now with a controversial data center. Birmingham's not alone, but is one of them. Been going on just this week. Give us a little bit of report from the ground, Rae'Mah. Just what's the vibe among folks you talk to on when that topic comes up?
Yeah, so I think the vibe here on the ground is like a lot of the people living in the communities that are being sought after for data centers moved there for a reason, because they wanted peace and quiet. So, because of course, data centers require a lot of land, and the motion right now is trying to get this specific area rezoned as an industrial zone. And it's interesting to see the collaborative community coming together to actually thwart And it's so interesting. This guy actually here in the picture, he says directly in at this like city hall meeting, he's like, there's no sound ordinances. They're going to be completely quiet. They will not use a lot of water. I'm like, oh. And so, you know, as you can imagine, the residents are seeing clearly through it. And so it's a lot of anti-data center sentiment here on the ground.
You hit on a big point before I throw over to Victor to get his kind of national context from communities. One of the big reasons this has gotten complicated is by nature. There's high energy demand. There's some environmental strengths, weather and water being prominent, as Brian alluded to. And so they're happening in rural counties. We technically have done some good reporting on this relationship between where the data is, where the compute is being used, and where the data centers are being built at the moment. Some of the context you talked about. Victor, you travel these fair lands of ours. What's the way? Are data centers coming up in conversations you're having?
They are. I was just recalling a conversation I had a couple months ago in Fargo, North Dakota. A state representative, Dick Anderson, had talked with me at length about basically data centers and how North Dakota is going to make a pretty aggressive play and how they're very well positioned competitively to go after them. He made the point that, you know, where a lot of states are going to have to build pretty expensive cooling systems, in North Dakota, almost 2/3 of the year, they can just open their doors and windows and get cooling without having to spend much on costs for running air conditioning or cooling systems, which just struck me that, you know, I don't know the economics of data centers, you know, case by case, but that this is going to be super competitive. It's going to be it's kind of like what they call in business a race to the bottom, which is how do you offer the most incentives to try to pull as much of this stuff in. And so, you know, you're going to have places with competitive weather. Jobs Ohio has a phenomenal incentive tax system that they've been able to put together for drawing things like that. And I think there's just going to be a lot of it. And so I think the thing with data centers is it's like plumbing, it's like electricity, it's a utility system. We need it. You can't have so much of our modern economy without it. And AI, of course, is just going to drive it even more. I think that's the next wave that Brian was talking about. So it's happening and it's real and we need it. But there's a difference in economic development between building utility systems and plumbing systems for the future versus how do you empower entrepreneurially and actually create new businesses. And you often hear a lot of officials, whether it's at the city or county or state level, talk about building data centers as a substitute for building an entrepreneurial economy. I've heard, I don't know how many times I've been to meetings where public officials say something like, we've brought Google and Amazon to town, and therefore we are a tech economy. And there's a few jobs there for running data centers for sure, but that's not the same as empowering an entrepreneurial ecosystem and building the next wave of great companies that's going to create, you know, long-term sustainable job growth in your community. And they're both parts of economic development, and they're both viable in their own way. But one is, you know, top-down utilities are necessary to power the system, and the other is bottom-up, which is how do you empower people to build the future of all people of all kinds. And they're just different, and we have to learn to walk and chew gum. That's not something that's easily done, I think, in economic development, is to realize they are two important but distinct aspects. But that is shifting now within economic development as people start to realize that building entrepreneurial empowerment is a core part of economic development. But it's just important to realize these are two conversations happening in parallel that are often mixed together.
I'm devastated to learn that I hadn't had my appropriate microphone on this whole time, but hopefully it's flipped over. Victor, you hit on two things there to preview a forthcoming builder's newsletter of mine. I know that this is like what's more exciting than getting a preview about the economic papers I've been pointed to. I got directed.
Nerding out is always exciting, Christopher. Thank you.
This is what we're here for, Victor.
Yeah.
I got turned on to a 2018 paper. Let's see if I can pull this up. That was looking at major breakthrough innovations since 1820. And I will somewhere get teased by every coworker of mine that when have I not mentioned, you know, the 19th or 14th century in our technical coverage. but it broke out like these major platform innovations that required infrastructure build out. And the question that the paper looked at was how lasting was the bubble, basically, how hurtful it was, and what the long-term benefit was. And so here it is. And so like railroads are kind of a classic example in this paper that we'll get previewed in a forthcoming piece of mine. Go to technically/subscribe for your own look at it. But the paper looks at, if this screen share will pop up, there we go. 2 centuries of innovations in stock market bubbles is the paper, July 2018, Texas A&M University professor Alina Sorescu. Thank you. The railroads become a classic example because there's a bunch of railroad busts, and you'd make a comparison right now to what you're hearing about data center busts. There's a bunch of railroad busts. The thing about railroad track is once you lay it, that infrastructure can get caught up later. But there was real economic harm in the short term. And so the paper was looking at kind of the comparisons of when is there a long-term benefit? Well, we did build out the infrastructure, and even if we catch up to it later, versus the short-term pain. Did it hurt individual consumers in a way that had let a lasting scar? And so was that build out helpful? Was it worth it if it hurt people too much in the short term? And that becomes the debate you have. You know, if we end up having a kind of correction, which to Brian's point, we tend to always have cyclical natures in our economy. So why wouldn't you bet and expect on some kind of correction in and around AI infrastructure? You end up having this weighing of, is the build out of infrastructure worth it no matter what happens? Or does it hurt individual people enough that it's over and it's not worth it? And that seems to hinge a bunch on it. And one last thing in the piece, and be curious to get your take on it. There's a 2020 book, Boom and Bust, that I got pointed to in an interview that I'm working through, that says a lot of it depends on the origin of the investment focus. Was the investment focus, did it come from market responding to a market need, or was there a regulatory change? Ends up being one example. So when there tends to be a regulatory change, creates more harmful bubbles. So as opposed to kind of market response. And the question the stance would be, AI might look a little bit more like responding to a market need. Victor, please shut up my nerding.
No. This is so cool. This is like, and I think our fan base, they've got to appreciate the economic nerding out, right? This is,
if you're listening to this, what it's not for
how many podcasts do you get to do that on? Which is that I think railroads are different than data centers in some sense, because railroads are the moving of people and the connecting of people. Like you think of the transcontinental railroad system. I was in Sacramento just a few weeks back, which is the opposite one end of the transcontinental railroad. And the ability to move people empowers people to connect, to build. It gives them access, and people as the builder, as the owners of production, as the ones who can make decisions. And that way you actually create more dynamism in doing that. Different than moving the raw materials of economic production around. And which is interesting. It's just kind of triggering that thought, which is, how do we differentiate between moving people versus moving raw materials or assets? And so I think the more we can move people, the better, because you mix and mingle people and their connections and their networks together, which empowers them more.
I love that. Rae'Mah.
I actually think that's such an interesting point too, that, the reflection of the railroads and how Victor just, it's a means of communication, a means of community. I just dropped a link in the chat from Reddit showing what 1 gigabyte of storage looked like in like 1969 versus like what it looked like in the year 2000. And so then you think about what's the evolution of these data centers look like as we find better ways to manage and store data. Like is in like 30 years from now, we're going to be riding through neighborhoods and there's just going to be these gigantic, desolate buildings that are no longer needed because of their size. And there'd be the analog way of managing data. So it's like, where do we see the evolution of it? With railroads, we are at least still able to use them and for the movement of people and goods. But what does it look like in the future?
Rae'Mah, stay with that for a second, because that is the tension when you like. One of the debates comes down to, these are right now popping up in rural communities, and there's a sense of like, will these be stranded assets in the terminologies, what you're talking about? Do you end up with useful now and then able to be left behind? Or like to use the 3 Mile Island example, that nuclear reactor that is being turned on by Microsoft in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, that was once a stranded asset that then has been repurposed in a new and interesting way. And this is at the heart of the debate we're having. We had a reporter out in a small town in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, covering. This is the wrong link, but we were covering a community debate around data centers in a rural community that was ultimately going to be used by the Mid-Atlantic. The dense Mid-Atlantic corridor was going to be using this data center in some form that was happening in a rural county. Rae'Mah, is that like happening in the debate around Birmingham about who is this for and who is left holding the bag in the end?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think, especially there's a lot of excitement around it right now. Once this initial fad moves on, this community is just going to be left behind, like you said, with the potential stranded asset. And we've seen this with other large buildings or things that have been put in place. Like, for example, I know I mentioned Anniston in our pre-call, but that used to be the home and place of Fort McClellan, a large military base, which is now not abandoned, but has remained dormant for many, many, many years, and was one of the core things of that local ecosystem's economic development, as far as like people making money, working at the base, buying things at the base, and all those different things. So like, what does happen when those things close down, and who becomes responsible for it, especially when you don't have economic development leaders who really knew what they were doing in the first place when they brought it there.
Pick up. Let's push this a little bit farther down the pathway, because if we're saying our audience is filled with people who identify as ecosystem builders, place-based economic development leaders, entrepreneur support organization leaders, I can put myself in the shoe of an ESO in any given state, and they're like, all right, my governor announced and did a big ribbon cutting thing for a $10 billion investment from insert household name tech firm to build out data centers. And I'm not sure I'm supposed to feel about that. Am I supposed to feel good because we're building infrastructure for what seems like a part of our economy of the future? Am I supposed to feel cheated because at the end of the day, those dollars have to go somewhere. And if the tax incentive or the direct investment is going to this, it's not going to a bottom-up strategy for entrepreneur support. What's your advice to that entrepreneur support organization leader in any state in this country when they ask you, how should I view my governor or state legislature investing in data centers?
So I think going back to my earlier talk, it's about sophistication in what you're asking for and what you're offering a data center, right? So in the Ohio example, I'm going to drop a thing in the chat.
Yeah.
We mentioned the tax abatement. That is not getting sales tax on a building that wasn't there before, right? So that means you're not out. You're not losing anything. What we've also said in Ohio is data centers, not Ohioans, must pay the cost of grid investments, right? So we're balancing. We understand. We said earlier, kind of like who the devil is in this scenario, right? And how to control and get the most out of the deal for the residents.
Yeah. Well, and so what this is making me think of, Brian, is like, Victor, your earlier point. When a data center that is going to be used by a household name tech firm, that is not the same as an office opening. It's different kinds of jobs or work, which isn't necessarily good or bad. It's worth clarifying that if your governor is saying we have a $10 billion investment from Apple, Amazon, Meta, whoever you want to put into this, that it's not untrue. But like our newsroom, the way our newsroom would approach that, it's not untrue. Like we can follow the investment, but you probably want to add some nuance, because we know that for many voters right now, when you conjure the idea of an investment of Google in your town, they picture well-paid software engineers tapping away on computers in an office somewhere. And that isn't necessarily what we're talking about. But that isn't necessarily good or bad. I just think there's a nuance that I think maybe in the language right now it's being lost, or at least intentionally obfuscated or not? I don't know. Victor, like when you think, I mean, give us your example from North Dakota. State Rep Dick Anderson, what do you think data centers means to him? Why does he want to focus on data centers?
I think it's what Brian was alluding to, which is that they're filling up space and land that would otherwise not be used, and they're bringing in economic activity in places that would otherwise not be there. And so that's great in its own way, but it is, to your point, it's not a substitute for economic empowerment of the citizenry at large, right? Which are different things. And so, you go to plenty of ribbon cuttings and, press releases where governors and mayors will say stuff like, we brought Google or Amazon to town, we're a tech economy now. And it's not the same thing as saying you're a tech economy. It just means you brought in a data center and you've brought in the jobs and the economic impact of a data center. But it's not training the citizenry to build great new technologies of the future. They're running utility systems with technology that's being developed elsewhere. And that's fine. It's just, it is what it is. And I think you're right. But it makes for a great headline to say we brought these great tech companies to town. And I've even been at major universities where I've talked to the presidents of major universities, and they'll say, we've got a sponsorship from, Google or Microsoft or Amazon of our campus. And therefore, we're an innovative campus. And it's not the same thing to give them access to your talent pipeline versus saying that we've designed a curriculum to train people to build innovations and entrepreneurial economies of the future. So I think it's just one, how are we thinking about innovation and entrepreneurship? Are we really empowering people at large? And I think that's the bigger narrative that is often missing, which is to the point about like, how do you address it? I think it's like what we're seeing here in Northwest Arkansas, which is get entrepreneurs to tell their stories, get people to tell their stories, because ultimately we're supposed to be a democracy where if you get the citizens to tell their stories and their wants and their needs, that should end up driving policy, and that should end up driving the institutions and what they're focused on. But I think the stories just don't get out, and we don't talk about this stuff enough. So, but credit to this amazing podcast and institution for getting the stories out. So we appreciate it very much.
To us all. To set up, maybe like you brought to mind for me, Victor. Shout out to my colleague Marie Eberhardt for a story that did really well recently, looking at what specific jobs do we mean by data centers, and talk to a bunch of people in a variety of different roles. And some of this is like very familiar economic development strategy, right? That there is a initially there's a construction phase, and for elected officials who are operating in terms, what's good about construction jobs is if you get shovel in the ground, those jobs are now, and they don't last forever, but they tend to last around the length of a term that someone might be in office. I have those jobs on site. There's that. Exactly. I'm gonna forget the story, but there's that quite literal story of what's the name of the big data center opening in Texas that was built in such a desolate part of the country that they ended up having to build a road because there was essentially traffic of the workers driving to go to the data center. And turns out if a few hundred cars are suddenly on a street that typically previously had none, you needed to build a second road to even just get to do the construction. So the doing suddenly generates some jobs and activity, but we all have this relationship as ecosystem builders around entrepreneurship that I think we tend to be talking about this longer term economic change. And data centers can help support them, not in the work being done at the data center, as you alluded to, Victor. Sometimes these facilities have a dozen to 24 people working there at any given time. I've employed more people than many data centers. Instead, it's supposed to be that this is a technology infrastructure that we want to support a portion of our economy. So I hear, maybe I'm in the final minutes with you guys, I hear a narrative from coming out of this group that we know that some of this infrastructure is necessary, but it can be overbilled. And so, Brian, as someone who has said you and the good people of Ohio have a portion of the good people of Ohio have welcomed data center. How would you guide the right mix of skepticism and welcoming to other entrepreneur support orgs? How do you make sure you're not letting someone take advantage of your community or oversell, but that you're not seeming, stuck in the mud for something that does seem necessary for a portion of this infrastructure? What's your guidance there?
Great. I have a great answer for this, which is
I'll be the judge of that.
We'll see. In the last roundup, we have allowed places like Northern California to dictate a standard to the rest of the country. And sometimes they're solving problems that they have, right? But they are not solving problems that we might have in Ohio or Alabama or other places. So I say, let's bring it back to this question. Ohio State is the leader because of where we are in the country and because of what we do in that part of Ohio of turning things like methane into fuel, right? So we can basically take data center output and create fuel for our cars. And now that would all now be in Ohio, right? And it would be clean and all those things. And so we don't have the data centers, and then we don't have like the expertise in our universities in the places where we live, we'll never find new and innovative solutions to these big problems.
Victor, Rae'Mah, build on that then. Like, what's when someone asks your advice, what are you saying to them?
That's actually very interesting. I'm actually working with a company right now in our current program that is actually turning carbon. They're capturing carbon and turning it into methane. And recently visited the National Carbon Capture Center as well. So if done really well, that can happen. I think I think my concern, and I think the concern of others also in my ecosystem, is the fact that, especially these small towns, having big players that want to come in and build data centers and not having maybe the gravitas or the je ne sais quoi to know how to navigate, how to get these things to also work out for your benefit as well. And then ultimately it just comes in, becomes a cheap win for like someone's local chamber of commerce. They get a ribbon cutting, the jobs last their term. And so it's interesting. I don't know how to prepare someone to actually handle that conversation and to make it beneficial for their communities.
Victor.
Yeah, what this made me think of, which is really interesting thought, which is around what economists, because we're all in like nerd out mode, which is the diffusion of knowledge, right? How do you take ideas and really innovative things and spread them out to people so they can use them? And it made me think about the university extension system, which was built well over 100 years ago, kind of the late 1800s, specifically around farming technology. Specifically, actually interesting around how do you grow cotton? How do you prevent the boll weevil from eating your cotton crop? Was actually the driver of the university extension program, and it was basically the means of building agricultural production, and then having universities go out into the community to teach people how to use that technology at a practical level. And I think of so much of now of what we think about like a great technology, it tends to actually end up sort of stuck in it's like in the 1%ers, right? The 1%ers great to get the great ideas and innovation, and then everyone else is just sort of left to fend for themselves, as opposed to intentionally trying to find means to get ideas out there into the populace so people can use the ideas and tools themselves. And so I think about that and what it would take to get us to shift our thinking into that basically it's going back to the future, right? It's like, how do we go back to the idea that the role of society should be to take knowledge and make sure it gets spread out to as many people that can use it. The means of innovation should be as democratized as possible.
Little shout out to Raj Chetty's economic mobility research here, because he has 3 ways to boost economic mobility, with kind of like a 4th little wrinkle that you just hit on, Victor. Like the 3 classic ones for boosting economic mobility is it's all about income integration. Schools, where you go to school, where you live, who your friends are. If you can get income integration to boost in any of those, that signals economic mobility. But to improve all of them, it's information access. Like if I know about the educational opportunities, if I know about kind of network effect opportunities, if I know about housing opportunities. So information ends up being the like underpinning of how you're able to do all of those. Last, like maybe this will be an aside before I move to close this out, but you guys made me think of one of the tech hubs in Missouri. Got a little bit of the funding and is now up for a new one out of Missouri S&T. Shout out to Kwame Efe, who I've spoken to a couple times. And something that you said, Brian, stuck out with me where he's like, Missouri, interestingly, already has a bunch of, I think I have some data here, a bunch of minerals, not rare earths. I don't know why this chart isn't loading, whatever. I'll close it out. But Missouri does not, outside of St. Louis, doesn't really have a strong, as robust a tech and entrepreneurship community as other Midwestern states. But a lot of the core infrastructure, rural Missouri does have. And kind of Kwam's take for his tech hub was how do you see a region owning more of that stack, from ripping the minerals out of the ground to producing any of the hardware to end up building on top of the hardware. And Kwam grew up in Ghana in West Africa, country that he and I bonded all over. And there's very similar conversations internationally. When do you have the places where the stuff is being ripped out of the ground? How do you capture more of that value chain in a place? And so, Brian, what you were saying about data centers reminded me of a similar thing. That's at the heart of the tension I think we feel, that some of these communities feel like they're just being used temporarily without any kind of long-term opportunity. And I think, Rae'Mah, you got to this too. If can Birmingham, Alabama truly benefit for the long term from this? Okay, then let's talk. And I felt like this is, Brian and Victor, your advice to others. If this is part of the long-term strategy for the people of your community to benefit, then let's do it. If this seems extractive and short-term, be wary. That's my takeaway from hearing you guys.
This is the old Mason-Dixon line playbook, right? When you're south of the Mason-Dixon line and you want to do something new that people may not love, you find a Black community and you put it there, right? And you're north of the Mason-Dixon line, you actually basically pay people off to put it there. Right? One's not better than the other. I mean, maybe it is. But if we can put those playbooks away and just start to focus on where's the right place, right? What's the right thing to do? How do we treat people well? Then you'll get people like the reason Ohioans buy into the idea of data centers because they have not been exploited by data centers, right? So when you exploit people, it turns out they don't trust you when you come to these hearings, for instance, right?
That might be the right way to go out. I think I'm going to close it there. Victor, Rae'Mah, any last parting shots?
This is great. I love it. Yeah, let's find ways to make sure that we don't exploit people and we use innovation technology and get it out there to people where it actually helps people instead of puts handcuffs on them.
Yeah, find a way to create leadership programs to teach our political officials in smaller cities how to advocate for their people. Not stunned and dazzled by the big names coming to their communities.
Ooh, I think that's
good.
Yeah. I think it is right. I think you're right. I think we have this theme of some folks just don't quite know when they're being sold a bill of goods. Brian, Rae'Mah, Victor, thanks as always for this riveting conversation on data centers. That's this month's Builders Live.
Who knew?
Who knew? If anyone could do it, we could. It'll form an upcoming Builders newsletter, and we'll drop full links below the video. We'll see you next time. Brian, Rae'Mah, Victor, thanks again. See everybody. Bye.